You're scrolling right now, aren't you? Mindlessly consuming content, one video after another, barely thinking, barely questioning, just reacting. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You're not alone. We've become the stupidest generation in history. Not because we lack information, we're drowning in it, but because we've lost the one thing that actually matters, the ability to think critically. We've outsourced our brains to algorithms, headlines, and whoever screams the loudest. And the cost? It's not just ignorance. It's collective stupidity on a scale we've never seen before. But here's what nobody's telling you. This didn't happen by accident. Socrates warned us. Plato saw it coming. Kant gave us the antidote. Yet here we are, trapped in echo chambers, manipulated by social media, and completely unaware that our minds are being rewired in real time. And if you think you're immune, that's exactly what they're counting on. In this video, we're tearing down the illusion. We're exposing how philosophy built civilization through critical thinking, and how we're watching it collapse under the weight of algorithmic manipulation, information overload, and tribal warfare. But more importantly, I'm going to show you how to fight back, how to reclaim your mind, how to think for yourself in a world designed to do the thinking for you. So if you're ready to stop being a passenger in your own brain, stick with me until the end. And if this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe to support the channel, because we need more people willing to think, not just react. Let's dive in.
Section 1. The Golden Age of Critical Thinking. How Philosophy Built Civilization.
You know what's funny? We walk around with supercomputers in our pockets, access to every book ever written, and the ability to connect with anyone on the planet. Yet somehow, we're dumber than ever. And I don't mean dumb in the can't do math sense. I mean dumb in the way that matters most. We've lost the ability to think critically. We've outsourced our brains to algorithms, headlines, and whoever screams the loudest on social media. But here's the kicker. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when humanity actually valued critical thinking, when asking questions wasn't just encouraged. It was the foundation of everything we built. Let's rewind a couple thousand years. Picture ancient Athens. No smartphones, no Netflix, no distractions. Just people sitting around, talking, debating, questioning everything. And at the center of it all was this guy named Socrates. Now, Socrates didn't claim to know everything. In fact, his whole philosophy was built on admitting ignorance. He'd walk up to people who thought they were smart and start asking questions. Simple, innocent questions that would completely dismantle their beliefs. That's the Socratic method. Question everything, assume nothing, and never stop digging for truth. This wasn't just intellectual flexing. It was the birth of critical thinking, the very thing that would go on to shape science, democracy, and human progress itself. Then came Plato, Socrates' student, who took things even further. He didn't just question the world. He questioned reality itself. What if everything we see is just a shadow of something deeper? What if the truth isn't obvious, but hidden, waiting for those brave enough to seek it? Plato understood that most people live in a cave, staring at shadows on the wall, thinking that's all there is. But the philosopher, the critical thinker, they break free, climb out of the cave, and see the light. That's what intellectual courage looks like. Not accepting the easy answer, but pursuing the real one, no matter how uncomfortable. And this mindset didn't just stay in philosophy. It became the backbone of Western civilization. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and you've got Immanuel Kant dropping one of the most important ideas in history. Sapere, dare know. Think for yourself. Don't let kings, priests, or anyone else do your thinking for you. Kant knew that critical thinking wasn't just about being smart. It was about freedom. A society that thinks is a society that can't be controlled. And for centuries, that's exactly what happened. Science exploded. Democracy spread. Progress accelerated. All because people refused to accept things at face value. But here's the problem. We've forgotten all of that. Somewhere along the way, we stopped asking questions. And now? Well, now we're paying the price. Because when you stop thinking critically, you don't just lose knowledge, you lose everything that makes civilization work.
Section 2, The Great Collapse, Why We Stop Thinking for Ourselves.
So what happened? How do we go from Socrates and Kant to a generation that gets their worldview from TikTok videos and Twitter hot takes? The decline didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, almost invisible. And that's what makes it so dangerous. We didn't wake up one day and decide to stop thinking. We just stopped noticing that we weren't thinking anymore. And the culprit? It's not just one thing. It's a perfect storm of intellectual laziness, convenience, and a system that rewards conformity over curiosity. Let's start with education. Now, I'm not saying schools are useless, but let's be real, most of them aren't teaching critical thinking. They're teaching memorization, standardized tests. Regurgitate the right answer, pass the exam, move on. There's no room for questioning, no space for independent thought. You're not rewarded for asking why. You're rewarded for staying in line, following the script, and not rocking the boat. And what does that create? A generation of people who are trained to consume information, not analyze it. People who can tell you what to think, but have no idea how to think. That's not education, that's programming. Then there's the entertainment industrial complex. We've built a culture where distraction is infinite and attention is currency. Every app, every platform, every piece of content is designed to keep you scrolling, clicking, consuming, but never truly engaging. Netflix autoplays the next episode before you even have time to process what you just watched. YouTube suggests another video before you can reflect on the last one. Social media feeds you an endless stream of dopamine hits, keeping your brain in a constant state of reactive stimulation. And here's the thing, none of this is accidental. These platforms are engineered by the smartest minds in the world to exploit your brain's weaknesses. They know how to bypass your critical thinking and keep you hooked. And it's working. But here's where it gets really insidious. We've convinced ourselves that consuming content is the same as learning. We watch a 3-minute explainer video and think we understand complex topics. We read a headline and assume we know the full story. We scroll through someone's Instagram and believe we know their life. Information overload has created the illusion of knowledge, and we've fallen for it. We're drowning in data, but starving for wisdom. And the worst part? We don't even realize it's happening. We think we're informed, educated, woke, but in reality, we're just parroting whatever narrative fits our tribe. Because that's what happens when you stop thinking critically. You don't become ignorant. You become confidently wrong. And that's the scariest part. We're not just passively dumb, we're aggressively stupid. We defend bad ideas with the same fervor people once reserved for truth. We attack anyone who questions us, label them as haters or closed-minded, and retreat further into our bubbles. Critical thinking requires humility, the willingness to admit you might be wrong. But we've built a culture that punishes doubt and rewards certainty, even when that certainty is based on nothing but vibes and algorithms. So yeah, we stopped thinking for ourselves. And now, we're living in the consequences.
Section 3, The Algorithm Trap, How Social Media Rewired Our Brains.
All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the algorithm in your pocket. Because if there's one thing that's killing critical thinking faster than anything else, it's social media. And I'm not just talking about the mindless scrolling or the addiction, though that's bad enough. I'm talking about something far more sinister. The way these platforms have fundamentally rewired how we think. They've turned our brains into prediction machines, constantly seeking validation, avoiding discomfort, and craving the next hit of dopamine. And the scariest part? Most of us don't even realize it's happening. Here's how it works. Every time you open Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or Facebook, you're not browsing. You're being fed. The algorithm studies your behavior, learns what you click on, what you linger on, what makes you angry or happy, and then serves you more of the same. It's not showing you the truth. It's showing you what keeps you engaged. And engagement doesn't come from challenging your beliefs or making you think. It comes from confirming what you already believe and triggering emotional reactions. So the algorithm traps you in an echo chamber, a cozy little bubble where everyone agrees with you, and anything that contradicts your worldview is filtered out. You're not exposed to diverse perspectives. You're marinated in your own biases until they harden into unshakable convictions. And it gets worse. Social media doesn't just reinforce your beliefs, it gamifies them. Every like, every share, every comment is a little reward that tells your brain, yes, you're right. Keep going. It's classical conditioning, the same principle Pavlov used on dogs, except now it's being used on you. And the result? We become tribal. Not in the I prefer this sports team sense, tribal in the if you disagree with me, you're my enemy sense. Nuance is dead. Complexity is boring. You're either with us or against us. And critical thinking? That's seen as weakness, hesitation, disloyalty. Because in the world of social media, thinking critically means questioning your tribe. And that's the ultimate sin. But here's the real kicker. This isn't just affecting how we think online. It's bleeding into every aspect of our lives. We've become so used to instant gratification, so conditioned to seek approval, that we've lost the ability to sit with uncomfortable ideas. We can't tolerate ambiguity. We can't handle being wrong. We can't engage with people who see the world differently without treating it like a battle. And why? Because the algorithm trained us that way. It taught us to react, not reflect, to defend, not explore, to consume, not create. We've handed over the keys to our minds, and now we're passengers in a car being driven by lines of code designed to maximize profit, not wisdom. So what's the cost? It's not just that we're misinformed. It's that we're intellectually lazy. We've outsourced critical thinking to Google, to influencers, to whoever has the best soundbite. We don't research, we skim headlines. We don't analyze, we form opinions in seconds based on vibes. And the result is a generation that's loud, confident, and wrong about almost everything. Because when you let an algorithm do your thinking, you don't end up smarter. You end up predictable. And predictable minds? They're easy to control.
Section 4. Information overload and the illusion of knowledge.
Now, let's address the paradox we're living in. We have more information at our fingertips than any generation in human history. You can pull up research papers, expert interviews, historical records, philosophical texts, all in seconds. And yet, we're more confused, more divided, and more confidently ignorant than ever before. How is that possible? Simple. We've confused access to information with understanding. We think that because we can Google something, we know it. But here's the harsh truth. Having information and having knowledge are not the same thing. And the gap between the two? That's where critical thinking used to live. Think about it. Before the internet, if you wanted to learn something, you had to work for it. You go to a library, find a book, read it cover to cover, take notes, think deeply about what you learned. That process forced you to engage, to question, to synthesize. But now you type a question into Google, skim the first result, maybe click on a Wikipedia page, and boom, you think you're informed. But you're not. You've consumed data, sure, but you haven't processed it. You haven't questioned its source, evaluated its credibility, or considered alternative perspectives. You just absorbed a surface-level summary and moved on. And that's not knowledge. That's intellectual fast food. And it's not just Google. It's the entire ecosystem of bite-sized content. 3-minute YouTube videos claiming to explain quantum physics. Instagram carousels summarizing centuries of philosophy. Twitter threads reducing complex geopolitical conflicts into 10 tweets. We've turned everything into a headline, a soundbite, a meme. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently wrong with accessible content. The problem is when we mistake that for actual understanding. When we think that watching a TED Talk makes us experts. When we believe that reading a few articles makes us informed. We're drowning in information, but we're not swimming. We're just flailing around, grabbing onto whatever floats by without ever stopping to ask if it's actually taking us anywhere. Here's where it gets dangerous. The illusion of knowledge breeds arrogance. When you think you know something, you stop asking questions. You stop seeking deeper understanding. You become unteachable. And in a world where misinformation spreads faster than truth, that's a recipe for disaster. Because the people who are most confident in their opinions are often the ones who've done the least amount of actual thinking. They've read a headline, watched a viral video, heard someone they trust repeat something, and that's enough. They don't fact-check. They don't cross-reference. They don't consider context. They just absorb, believe, and repeat. And before you know it, half the population is walking around with strong opinions on topics they don't actually understand. So what's the solution? It's not to abandon information. It's to reclaim wisdom. And wisdom doesn't come from consuming more. It comes from processing better. It means slowing down, reading deeply, questioning sources, sitting with uncertainty instead of rushing to conclusions. It means recognizing that true knowledge isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions. Because if there's one thing Socrates understood, it's that the wisest person isn't the one who knows the most. It's the one who knows how little they truly know. And until we embrace that humility again, we'll keep drowning in data while starving for meaning.
Section 5. Tribal Thinking and the Death of Nuance.
Let's get uncomfortable for a second. One of the biggest reasons critical thinking is dying isn't just algorithms or information overload. It's us. We've chosen comfort over truth. We've chosen belonging over understanding. We've turned our opinions into our identities, and now, questioning those opinions feels like an attack on who we are. And that's how you kill critical thinking. Not by banning books or censoring ideas, but by making people too emotionally invested in their beliefs to ever reconsider them. Welcome to the age of tribal thinking, where nuance goes to die and intellectual courage is seen as betrayal. Here's what tribal thinking looks like. You pick a side, left, right, progressive, conservative, whatever, and suddenly every issue becomes binary. You're either with us or against us. There's no middle ground, no shades of gray, no room for complexity. And the moment you express doubt, the moment you say, hey, maybe this issue is more complicated than we think, you're labeled a traitor. You're one of them. You're canceled, unfollowed, blocked. Because in a tribe, loyalty matters more than truth. And critical thinking? That's the ultimate disloyalty. Because thinking critically means questioning your own side, and tribes don't tolerate that. And social media has made this 1,000 times worse. Because now, your tribe isn't just the people you know, it's millions of strangers online who reinforce your beliefs 24/7. You're never alone with your thoughts. You're never forced to confront uncomfortable truths. You're surrounded by an echo chamber that tells you you're right, you're smart, you're on the right side of history. And anyone who disagrees, they're not just wrong, they're evil, stupid, dangerous. There's no space for dialogue, no room for debate, no possibility of learning from someone with a different perspective. Just endless virtue signaling, performative outrage, and intellectual tribalism masquerading as activism. But here's the tragedy. Tribal thinking doesn't just kill critical thinking, it kills empathy. Because when you see the world as us versus them, you stop seeing people as people. They become avatars, caricatures, enemies. You stop trying to understand why they believe what they believe. You stop asking questions. You stop listening. And in doing so, you lose the very thing that makes you human, the ability to connect, to learn, to grow. Critical thinking isn't just about logic and reason. It's about humility, curiosity, and a willingness to admit you might be wrong. But tribal thinking strips all of that away. It replaces wisdom with certainty, curiosity with defensiveness, and dialogue with warfare. So where does that leave us? Stuck, divided, intellectually stagnant. We're living in a world where everyone has strong opinions and no one has strong reasoning. Where people would rather win an argument than find the truth. Where being right matters more than being accurate. And the scary part? Most people don't even realize it's happening. They think they're critical thinkers because they disagree with the other side. But disagreeing isn't the same as thinking. Parroting your tribe's talking points isn't the same as forming your own conclusions. If you can't steelman the opposing argument, if you can't articulate why someone might believe something different without calling them an idiot, then you're not thinking critically. You're just picking teams, and that's not enough anymore.
Section 6. The Socratic antidote. Practicing the lost art of questioning.
All right, enough doom and gloom. Let's talk solutions. Because here's the good news: critical thinking isn't dead, it's dormant. And like any muscle, it can be rebuilt. But it requires something most people aren't willing to do: question everything, including themselves. And I mean everything: your beliefs, your assumptions, your sources, your biases. Because if Socrates taught us anything, it's that the path to wisdom begins with admitting how little you actually know. And the tool he used to get there? Questions. Simple, ruthless, unrelenting questions. The Socratic method is deceptively simple. You start with a belief, any belief. Then you ask, why do I believe this? What evidence supports it? Could I be wrong? What would change my mind? And here's the kicker: you don't ask these questions to win an argument. You ask them to find the truth. That's the difference between critical thinking and intellectual combat. One is about discovery, the other is about dominance. And most people today, they're stuck in combat mode. They ask questions not to learn, but to trap, to expose, to humiliate. That's not the Socratic method. That's just being an asshole with good vocabulary. So how do you practice this in real life? Start small. The next time you encounter an idea that makes you uncomfortable, don't dismiss it. Sit with it. Ask yourself, what if this is true? What would that mean? What am I afraid of if I'm wrong? Most people avoid these questions because they're scared of the answers. But that fear, that's your ego protecting itself. And your ego is not your friend when it comes to critical thinking. It wants to be right, to feel superior, to stay comfortable. But wisdom? Wisdom lives on the other side of discomfort. It lives in the questions you're too scared to ask. Here's a practical exercise. Pick a belief you hold strongly, something you defend in an argument. Now, write down 3 reasons why you might be wrong. Not why the other side is stupid, why you specifically might be mistaken. Can't do it? Then you're not thinking critically. You're just holding an opinion. And opinions without reasoning are just noise. But if you can articulate the best possible argument against your own position, if you can see the world through someone else's eyes without feeling threatened, then you're on the path to real understanding. Because critical thinking isn't about being right. It's about being less wrong over time. And here's the beautiful part. Once you start practicing this, you become dangerous. Not dangerous in a destructive way, but dangerous to manipulation, propaganda, and intellectual laziness. You stop being a passive consumer of information and become an active seeker of truth. You stop letting other people do your thinking for you. You start seeing through the narratives, the spin, the emotional manipulation. And most importantly, you stop being afraid of being wrong. Because being wrong isn't failure, it's progress. It means you learn something. And in a world full of people clinging desperately to bad ideas, the willingness to change your mind is the ultimate superpower. But it all starts with one thing: asking better questions.
Section 7. Breaking free from echo chambers. Seeking uncomfortable truths.
So you've started asking questions. Good. But here's where most people hit a wall. They're asking questions inside an echo chamber. They're challenging their beliefs, sure, but only with sources that already agree with them. They're reading articles that confirm their worldview, watching videos that reinforce their opinions, and surrounding themselves with people who think exactly like they do. And then they wonder why they're not growing. Here's the harsh truth. You can't think critically if you're only exposed to one perspective. You have to actively seek out uncomfortable truths, engage with ideas that challenge you, and stop treating disagreement like a threat. Let's be real. Echo chambers are comfortable. They feel safe. Everyone agrees with you. No one challenges you. And you get to feel smart without doing any actual thinking. But comfort is the enemy of growth. If you're never uncomfortable, you're never learning. And the algorithm knows this. It knows you don't want to be challenged. So it feeds you exactly what you want to hear. But here's the problem. If you only consume content that confirms your beliefs, you're not informed. You're indoctrinated. You're living in a carefully curated bubble designed to make you feel right, not to help you be right. And the longer you stay in that bubble, the harder it becomes to see reality clearly. So how do you break free? First, diversify your information diet. If you lean left, read conservative thinkers. If you lean right, engage with progressive perspectives. And I don't mean hate reading to find ammunition. I mean genuinely trying to understand why intelligent people might see the world differently than you do. Subscribe to podcasts, newsletters, or channels that challenge your assumptions. Follow people who disagree with you, but do so thoughtfully. Because here's what you'll discover. Most people aren't evil or stupid. They just have different values, different experiences, different priorities. And understanding that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It just means you're finally thinking critically instead of tribally. Second, practice intellectual humility. Admit when you don't know something. Say, I'm not sure, instead of pretending to have all the answers. Ask questions instead of making statements. Because the people who scream the loudest are usually the ones who've thought the least. And the people who actually know what they're talking about, they're comfortable with uncertainty. They know that the world is complex, that issues are nuanced, that easy answers are usually wrong. So if you find yourself feeling 100% certain about a controversial topic, that's not confidence. That's ego. And ego is the death of critical thinking. Finally, embrace discomfort. The next time someone challenges your beliefs, don't get defensive. Don't shut down. Don't retreat into your echo chamber. Lean in. Ask follow-up questions. Try to steelman their argument. Present it in the strongest possible way, not the weakest. Because if you can't do that, you don't actually understand the issue. You're just repeating talking points. And here's the thing, most people never do this. They live their entire lives inside intellectual bubbles, never once stepping outside to see if their beliefs can withstand scrutiny. But the few who do, they become some of the sharpest, most insightful thinkers in the world. Not because they have all the answers, but because they're willing to question everything, including themselves. And that's what separates wisdom from ignorance.
Section 8. The Path Forward. Rebuilding a Generation That Thinks.
All right, we've diagnosed the problem. We've talked about how we got here, why it matters, and what we could do individually. But here's the thing. Individual action isn't enough. Because the collapse of critical thinking isn't just a personal issue. It's a systemic one. And if we want to fix it, we need to rebuild the systems that shape how we think. That means reforming education, rethinking leadership, and fundamentally changing how we consume and share information. This isn't about nostalgia or going back to some imaginary golden age. It's about taking the best of what worked, Socratic questioning, intellectual humility, deep reading, and adapting it for the modern world. Because if we don't, the next generation will be even worse off than this one. Let's start with education. Because here's the brutal truth. Most schools are not teaching kids how to think. They're teaching them what to think. Memorize these facts, pass this test, get this grade. There's no space for curiosity, no room for debate, no emphasis on asking why. And that needs to change. We need to stop treating education like a factory assembly line and start treating it like what it actually is, the foundation of civilization. That means teaching philosophy, logic, rhetoric. Teaching kids how to analyze arguments, identify fallacies, evaluate sources. Teaching them that being wrong is okay, that changing your mind is a strength, that intellectual humility is a virtue. Because if we raise a generation that values critical thinking, everything else, science, democracy, progress, follows naturally. But it's not just schools. It's leadership. Because the leaders we celebrate, the influencers we follow, the voices we amplify, they set the tone for what we value. And right now, we're elevating the loudest, not the wisest. The most confident, not the most thoughtful. The most entertaining, not the most accurate. We reward hot takes over nuance, outrage over analysis, certainty over humility. And that's a problem. Because when leaders stop thinking critically, when they prioritize optics over truth, when they play to the crowd instead of challenging it, they don't just fail themselves, they fail everyone who follows them. So we need to demand better. We need to stop giving attention to people who traffic in division and start supporting those who promote understanding. And finally, we need to change how we consume information. Because the current model is broken. Social media platforms profit from keeping us engaged, not informed. News outlets prioritize clicks over accuracy. Content creators chase algorithms instead of truth. And we, as consumers, have become complicit. We scroll mindlessly, react emotionally, and share impulsively without ever stopping to think. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can choose to slow down. We can choose to read deeply instead of skimming headlines. We can choose to verify before we share. We can choose to engage with content that challenges us instead of content that coddles us. Because every time we make that choice, we're voting for a world that values wisdom over noise. Here's the bottom line. The death of critical thinking is not inevitable. It's a choice. A choice to stay comfortable instead of getting curious. A choice to follow the crowd instead of thinking for yourself. A choice to let algorithms, influencers, and tribes do your thinking for you. But you can make a different choice. You can ask better questions. You can seek uncomfortable truths. You can rebuild the lost art of reasoning one thought at a time. Because the world doesn't need more people parroting opinions. It needs people who think, people who question, people who refuse to accept easy answers. And if enough of us make that choice, we don't just save critical thinking. We save everything it built: science, democracy, progress, civilization itself. So the question isn't whether we can rebuild a generation that thinks. The question is, will we?
Conclusion. The choice is yours.
So here we are. You just spent the last several minutes doing something most people refuse to do: thinking deeply, questioning, reflecting, and that alone puts you ahead of the curve. But here's the real question. What are you going to do with this? Because knowing the problem isn't enough. Understanding how we got here isn't enough. You have to act. You have to practice the Socratic method in your daily life. Question your assumptions. Escape your echo chamber. Slow down before forming opinions. Read deeply instead of skimming headlines. And most importantly, have the intellectual courage to admit when you're wrong. Because that's not weakness. That's growth. The death of critical thinking isn't inevitable. It's a choice. And every single day, you're making that choice. Are you going to let algorithms think for you? Are you going to stay comfortable in your tribe? Or are you going to become one of the few who dares to think independently, who seeks uncomfortable truths, who refuses to accept easy answers? Here's my challenge. Take one belief you hold strongly and spend this week questioning it. Not to abandon it, but to understand it better. Ask yourself why you believe it. What evidence supports it? What would change your mind? Do that, and you're already doing more critical thinking than 90% of people out there. And if this video challenged you, if it made you think differently, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who refuse to be intellectually lazy, and your support helps us reach more minds that are ready to wake up. Because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more thinkers. So go out there and think for yourself. Question everything. And never, ever outsource your mind to someone else.